All right, let's dive right into one of the most critical and honestly, one of the most unforgiving principles of strategy, Law 19. The idea is simple, but the consequences? Well, they're profound. Because in the high stakes game of power, a single misjudgment can be your very last move.
Just think about it for a second. We've all been there, right? A joke that landed completely wrong. A negotiation where you pushed just a little too far. Maybe you made an assumption about someone's character that turned out to be disastrous. This law is all about understanding the complex landscape of human nature, so you never, ever make that mistake again when it really counts.
So here's the core idea. You absolutely cannot assume that other people think or react the way you do. It's a fundamental mistake. The world is a jungle and it's teeming with different species of people. Some are harmless, sure, but others are wolves dressed up like lambs, and trying to fool a wolf with a trick designed for a lamb, well, that's just a recipe for disaster. This isn't about being cynical, not at all. It's about being a realist. It's about being a strategist. Okay, so how do you spot these wolves before they get a chance to bite? The very first step is to learn the major types. You can think of what's in the source material as a field guide, a guide to the 5 most dangerous and difficult kinds of people you're likely to run into. And trust me, mastering this typology is your first and most important line of defense. Here they are, and we're going to break down each one because just being able to recognize them is half the battle. Think of it like learning to identify the poisonous snakes in that jungle we talked about. It's not about being paranoid, it's about being aware. So let's start with the most explosive one. Let's really get into the psychology of this guy. The arrogant and proud man, he isn't just confident. His pride is actually this incredibly thin shell protecting a deeply fragile ego. So if you so much as crack that shell with a minor joke, a small critique, he won't just get mad. He will overreact with a level of vengeance that is absolutely wildly disproportionate to whatever you did. Seriously, it's like poking a hornet's nest. And this is the crucial point. There's no clever strategy here. You can't outwit him, you can't appease him, and you certainly can't reason with him once his pride is wounded. The moment you sense that brittle, overactive ego, that tendency to take everything as a personal attack, the advice is blunt and it is simple. Flee. Get away. Do not engage. Period. Okay, let's move on to our next type. This one is way more subtle and, in a lot of ways, much more insidious. The hopelessly insecure man won't explode. Oh no, he'll smile right to your face. But underneath, his wounded ego is just simmering. His revenge isn't one big blow, it's a slow, creeping sabotage. He's the guy who chips away at your reputation behind your back, forgets to pass on that crucial piece of information, and undermines your work in these tiny little bites that you barely even notice, until, of course, the real damage is done. The phrase, nibble you to death, is just chillingly accurate, isn't it? It perfectly captures the danger. It's this war of attrition that you don't even realize you're fighting until it's way too late. So just like with the arrogant man, the only winning move here is to identify this type early and create as much distance as you possibly can. Now, our next type, Mr. Suspicion. He is a fascinating case. This guy lives in a world he built himself, a paranoid world where everyone is secretly plotting against him. He's the main character in a conspiracy of his own making. And because he expects betrayal, he interprets every single action, every single word as evidence. He literally manufactures proof out of thin air. And that makes him a uniquely unpredictable opponent. Now, this strategy for dealing with Mr. Suspicion is a total double-edged sword. On the one hand, his paranoid nature makes him pretty easy to manipulate. You can feed his suspicions, you can direct them towards your own rivals, but you have to understand you are playing with fire. If his paranoid gaze ever turns on you, you instantly become the irredeemable enemy, and there is no amount of logic or evidence in the world that will ever convince him otherwise. This might be the most dangerous type of all, the serpent. See, unlike the others, he gives you no immediate sign that you've offended him. He'll smile, he'll be polite, he'll act like he's moved on. But he is not moving on. He is filing that offense away. He's calculating, and he is waiting. He will bide his time, months, years, maybe even decades, until the perfect moment arrives. And when he strikes, his revenge will be precise, cold, and absolutely devastating. So the strategy here is severe, but it has to be, because the threat is absolute. If you realize you've crossed a serpent, you have 2 choices, and only 2. Either you remove him from the game entirely, so he has zero capacity for revenge, or you get him so far out of your orbit that he can never, ever touch you again. There is no middle ground. There is no negotiating. Any other option is just giving him more time to plot. Our final type is the plain, unassuming man, and he's a total paradox. You might look at him and see an easy target, right? He's not particularly clever or sophisticated, but here's the twist. His simplicity is his armor. All those complicated schemes, those subtle manipulations, the layered deceptions, they just go right over his head. He doesn't have the imagination to follow your plot, so he never falls into your trap. And here's the key. Do not underestimate this person. If you offend him, his reaction will be just as simple and direct as his thinking. He won't plot, he'll just act. And the book offers this brilliant little test. Tell a subtle joke or a story with a second meaning. If he just gives you a blank stare, you know who you're dealing with. Be direct and simple with this guy, or just don't deal with him at all. So, now that we understand the theory behind all this, let's look at the practice. Or, in this case, the catastrophic failures in practice. These are not just cool stories. They are crucial case studies that show the devastating consequences of misjudging an opponent. This is a perfect example of the arrogant and proud man archetype played out on a global scale. The Shah, ruler of this mighty empire, looked at Genghis Khan, who at the time was the leader of a relatively new Mongol power, and he just saw a barbarian, an inferior. So he gravely insulted Khan's envoys, assuming his own power made him untouchable. It was a fatal miscalculation. He completely misjudged Khan's immense pride and his capacity for vengeance. In response, Khan didn't just seek revenge, he systematically erased the Shah's entire civilization from the map. This next story is just incredible. J. Frank Norfleet was a plains rancher who got conned out of his life savings. The swindler saw a simple, harmless victim, took his money, and moved on. That was their fatal error. Norfleet didn't just go to the police. No, he dedicated the next 5 years of his life and his remaining fortune to a relentless, cross-continental manhunt. He became a detective, a master of disguise, a one-man wrecking crew who single-handedly tracked down and dismantled an entire criminal syndicate. He was the unassuming man who, once wronged, became an unstoppable force of nature.
This tale is the perfect illustration of the serpent with a long memory. When Prince Chang'er was a powerless exile, a court minister treated him with public contempt. The prince showed no reaction. He just absorbed the insult and moved on. But years later, when fate had completely reversed their positions and the prince held absolute power, one of his first acts was to march his army back to that minister's city to settle that old score. For the serpent, time is irrelevant. The memory of an insult is eternal.
And our final story brings us back to the plain and unassuming man. So the famously sophisticated art dealer Duveen looked at Henry Ford, the plain-spoken industrialist, and saw an easy sale. He laid on the flattery, the complex sales tactics, assuming Ford would just be impressed. But Ford, in his simplicity, wasn't swayed by all the fancy words. He saw the condescension behind them, felt insulted, and just walked away, costing Duveen what could have been the biggest sale of his entire career. All of these stories, they all point to one single, powerful conclusion. The ability to correctly judge people isn't just a useful social skill. It is a fundamental key to power and to survival. So, how do we actually get good at it? Okay, so how do we apply this? The author leaves us with 2 ironclad rules. First, never, ever rely solely on your instincts. Your gut feelings are notoriously unreliable. They get clouded by your own emotions, your biases, your wishful thinking. You need concrete knowledge. You need to investigate people's past actions, watch how they behave under pressure, gather real intelligence. And second, never trust appearances. The world is a stage, right? A show of bravado often masks cowardice, while a polite smile can hide a serpent's cold heart. Your task is to become a student of human nature, learning to see the contradictions between who people pretend to be and who they really are. This quote from Lord Chesterfield just perfectly nails the entire idea. A physical wrong, that might eventually be forgotten, but an insult to someone's pride, to their intelligence, to their dignity, that is never forgotten. It gets etched into their memory. You just never know who the powerless person of today will be tomorrow. Contempt is a luxury you can never, ever afford. And that brings us to the final, really stark conclusion. Unlike a lot of the other laws of power, this one has no reversal. There is never an advantage to being ignorant about the people you're dealing with. It is always, without exception, a liability. This is not optional. You must learn to distinguish the different animals in the jungle, because if you can't tell the lion from the lamb, you will eventually get eaten. So I'll leave you with this to think about. Look around your own world, your work, your social circles, even your family. Who have you dismissed as harmless? Who have you written off as unimportant? After everything we've just gone over, how sure are you, really, that you've made the right call?